Let's step into a very practical chapter because here we move from understanding governance to actually putting it into action through policies. Specifically, we'll look at how organizations assess AI use cases, manage risk, and govern data right from the start. Here's the journey ahead. We'll begin at the very beginning of any AI initiative, evaluating whether a use case even makes sense, screening it for risk early, identifying the stakeholders involved, and setting up approval gates so nothing rushes ahead unchecked. Then we'll get into risk and ethics, exploring assessment methodologies, the idea of ethics by design, impact assessments, and how to mitigate risks you find. And finally, we'll turn to the lifeblood of AI, data, looking at how data should be collected and sourced, how we ensure its quality and fitness, how we govern it and track its lineage, and how we protect privacy and security throughout. Here's the mindset I'd encourage. Think of this chapter as building the front end guardrails of responsible AI, the checks that happen before and during a project, not after. As we go, keep asking, how does this catch problems early? Because that's the whole point. Let's begin. Let's start right at the beginning of any AI project with a deceptively simple question. Should we even be doing this? That's what business case evaluation is all about. Here's the idea. Before pouring time and money into an AI system, an organization should evaluate whether it actually makes sense. Does it solve a real problem, deliver genuine value, and align with the organization's goals? This is the criteria-based gate at the very start. Now you might wonder, isn't this just normal project planning? Partly, yes. But with AI, there's an extra layer. Let me explain. AI is exciting, and that excitement can lead organizations to adopt it just because it's trendy, not because it's the right tool. I've seen teams chase an AI solution for a problem that a simple spreadsheet could have solved better and far more safely. Have you noticed how often "let's use AI" comes before "what problem are we solving"? So good business case evaluation asks grounding questions. What's the actual problem? Is AI genuinely the best solution? What value will it create? And does that justify the cost and the risk? Notice that risk enters the conversation right here at the very start. Here's the governance insight. Evaluating the business case isn't just about money. It's the first checkpoint where we ask whether this AI use is worthwhile and appropriate at all. Sometimes the most responsible decision is not to build the AI in the first place. So as a professional, embrace this early gate. A strong business case sets the foundation for everything that follows, and a weak one is a signal to pause before you've sunk resources into something that shouldn't exist. Let's look at a crucial early step that can save an organization enormous trouble. Initial risk screening. This happens right near the start, and it's all about catching the big risks early. Here's the concept. Initial risk screening is a quick preliminary assessment to gauge how risky a proposed AI use case is before diving deep. Think of it as a triage step, a first look to sort the low-risk ideas from the ones that need serious scrutiny. Why do this early rather than later? Let me use an analogy. Think of airport security. They don't do an exhaustive search on every single person. That would be impossible. Instead, they screen quickly and flag the cases that need closer attention. Initial risk screening works the same way for AI projects. So how does it work in practice? Imagine a company considering several AI projects. A screening might quickly identify that an internal tool for scheduling meetings is low risk, while an AI that makes decisions affecting people's employment is high risk and needs a full assessment. That early sorting focuses your attention where it matters most. Here's why this is so valuable for governance. It prevents two failures at once. It stops high-risk projects from sneaking through without proper review, and it stops the organization from wasting heavy scrutiny on harmless ones. It's about proportionality, matching the depth of review to the level of risk. Here's the lesson. Early risk screening is your first safety net. It ensures dangerous use cases get flagged before they gain momentum and become hard to stop. So as a professional, champion this step. A quick, smart screen at the start directs your limited governance energy exactly where it's needed and catches the serious risks while they're still easy to address. Let's talk about a step that's often rushed but genuinely shapes whether AI governance succeeds: identifying and engaging stakeholders. Doing this early and well makes everything smoother. Here's the idea: stakeholders are all the people and groups who affect or are affected by the AI system. Identifying them means figuring out who they are, and engaging them means actually involving them in the process. Both matter. Now, let me challenge a common blind spot. Teams often think of stakeholders as just the people building or paying for the system. But the most important stakeholders are sometimes the ones affected by it, the people on the receiving end of the AI's decisions. Let me give you an example. Imagine an AI tool being designed to help allocate social services to citizens. Who are the stakeholders? The technical team and the budget holders, yes, but also the caseworkers who'll use it, and crucially, the citizens whose lives it affects. If you only consult the first group, you'll miss risks that only the others can see. Here's a question worth sitting with. How can you govern an AI system fairly if you never hear from the people it impacts most? You can't, not really. That's why engagement, not just identification, matters. Talking to affected groups surfaces concerns and risks you'd never spot from the inside. Here's the governance lesson. Stakeholder identification and engagement is how you bring real-world perspectives and affected voices into the process early, when you can still change things. As a professional, always ask, who does this AI touch, and have we actually listened to them? Because the stakeholders you overlook are exactly where the surprises and often the harms come from. Engaging them early is both wiser and more responsible. Let's explore the mechanisms that keep AI projects from rushing ahead unchecked: approval workflows and governance gates. These are the structured checkpoints that build discipline into the process. Here's the concept. A governance gate is a defined point where a project must get approval before moving to the next stage. An approval workflow is the structured path of who reviews and signs off at each gate. Together, they ensure decisions are made deliberately, not just by momentum. Let me use an analogy you'll recognize. Think of building a house. You can't just keep constructing without inspections at key stages. The foundation gets checked before walls go up, the wiring before the walls are sealed. Each inspection is a gate. AI governance gates work the same way. You must pass review before proceeding. Here's why this matters so much with AI. Without gates, an exciting project can barrel from idea to deployment with no one stopping to ask the hard questions. Imagine an AI system that goes live before anyone formally checked it for bias or legal compliance, simply because no gate forced that check. Scary, right? Gates prevent exactly that. So picture a healthy workflow. A high-risk AI project must pass an early gate approving the use case, another after risk assessment, and a final one before deployment, each requiring sign-off from the right people. Nothing skips ahead. Here's the governance takeaway. Approval workflows and gates turn good intentions into enforced discipline. They ensure the right people review the right things at the right moments. As a professional, help design gates that are rigorous enough to catch problems, but not so bureaucratic that people route around them. Well-placed gates are how an organization stays in control of its AI, deliberately advancing only when it's truly ready to. Let's get into the heart of managing AI risk, the methodologies we use to actually assess it. Earlier we did quick screening, now we go deeper into structured assessment. Here's the idea. A risk assessment methodology is a systematic way of identifying, analyzing, and evaluating the risks of an AI system. Rather than guessing, it gives you a repeatable process for understanding what could go wrong and how serious it would be. Why do we need a methodology rather than just thinking about it casually? Let me explain. Human intuition about risk is unreliable. We tend to fixate on dramatic risks and overlook quiet, likely ones. A structured method forces you to consider risks thoroughly and consistently so nothing important slips through. Here's how it typically works. A good methodology guides you to ask, What could go wrong? How likely is it? And how severe would the impact be? You examine risks across different dimensions: technical, ethical, legal, and societal, the very harms we discussed in earlier chapters. Let me give you an example. Imagine assessing an AI used in lending. A solid methodology would prompt you to consider bias against certain groups, accuracy failures, privacy concerns, and legal compliance, each evaluated for likelihood and severity. Without that structure, you might focus only on accuracy and miss the discrimination risk entirely. Here's the governance lesson. Methodologies bring rigor and consistency to risk assessment, so it doesn't depend on whoever happens to be thinking about it that day. They ensure you look broadly and systematically. As a professional, you'll often apply or help build these methodologies. The goal is always thoroughness, examining the full range of potential harms in an organized way. Because the risks you assess methodically are the ones you can actually manage, while the ones you never thought to look for are the ones that come back to hurt you. Let's explore a powerful idea that shifts ethics from an afterthought to a foundation: ethics by design. The name itself tells you a lot, so let's unpack it. Here's the principle. Ethics by design means building ethical considerations into an AI system from the very beginning, baking them into the design itself rather than bolting them on at the end. Ethics becomes part of how you create the system, not a final inspection. Let me explain why this distinction is so important. Imagine trying to add fairness to an AI system after it's already built, trained on biased data, and deployed. It's incredibly hard, like trying to add a foundation to a house that's already standing. But if you consider fairness from the start, choosing good data, building in safeguards, it's far more effective and far cheaper. Have you ever tried to fix a problem that was baked in from the beginning? It's painful. Ethics by design avoids that pain. Here's a concrete way to picture it. A team building an AI hiring tool with ethics by design would from day one think about fairness, ask whose data they're using, consider how to ensure transparency, and design for human oversight. These aren't last-minute patches, they're shaping decisions made throughout. Here's the governance insight. Ethics by design recognizes a simple truth. The best time to prevent harm is before it's built in. It's proactive rather than reactive. This echoes privacy by design, a concept many of you know applied to the broader world of AI ethics. Here's the lesson. As a professional, push for ethical thinking at the earliest stages of any AI project. Ask the hard questions during design, not during damage control. Because an ethically designed system rarely needs an ethical rescue later. Building it right from the start is both the easier path and the responsible one. Let's look at a key tool in responsible AI, the impact assessment. You'll encounter these throughout your career, so let's understand what they are and why they are required. Here's the concept. An impact assessment is a structured evaluation of the effects an AI system could have on people, groups, or society before and during its use. It's a deliberate effort to understand the consequences, especially the potential harms, of deploying the system. How is this different from the risk assessment we just discussed? They're related, but an impact assessment focuses specifically on the effects on people and rights, not just technical or business risk. It asks who could be affected by this and how, including in ways that might harm their rights, fairness, or well-being. Let me give you a real example. Imagine an AI system that will decide who qualifies for a government benefit. An impact assessment would examine questions like, could this wrongly deny people who need help? Could it disproportionately affect a vulnerable group? What happens to someone harmed by an error? It forces you to think hard about human consequences. Here's why these are often required, sometimes by law. For high-stakes AI, regulators and good governance demand that you actually study the impacts before unleashing the system, not discover them through real harm afterward. The EU AI Act and privacy laws, for instance, build in such assessment requirements for certain systems. Here's the governance takeaway. Impact assessments are how we look before we leap. documenting potential effects so we can prevent or mitigate harm proactively. As a professional, treat them as essential for any system that significantly affects people. Always ask, have we genuinely assessed the impact on the humans involved? Because understanding the consequences in advance is the difference between responsible deployment and a harmful surprise. Let's talk about what happens after you've identified risks, namely, doing something about them through mitigation and control measures. Finding risks is only useful if you act on them. Here's the idea. Risk mitigation means taking steps to reduce a risk, either making it less likely to happen or less harmful if it does. Control measures are the specific safeguards you put in place to achieve that. Together, they're how you actually manage the risks you found. Now, here's an important framing. You rarely eliminate risk entirely. That's usually impossible. Instead, you reduce it to an acceptable level. Think of it like driving. You can't make driving perfectly risk-free, but seatbelts, brakes, and speed limits reduce the danger to something we accept. AI controls work the same way. Let me give you examples of what controls look like. Imagine an AI system at risk of producing biased decisions. Mitigation might include improving the training data, adding bias testing, and requiring human review of high-stakes decisions. Each of those is a control that lowers the risk. For a privacy risk, controls might include collecting less data and encrypting what you keep. There's also a useful idea here, the hierarchy of mitigation. The best option is to avoid the risk entirely, perhaps by not using AI for that task. If you can't avoid it, you reduce it with controls, and whatever remains is residual risk, which someone must consciously accept. Here's the governance lesson. Identifying risks without mitigating them is just a list of worries. Mitigation and controls are where governance actually protects people. As a professional, always pair every significant risk with a plan. How will we reduce this, and what control will be put in place? Because a risk you've identified and controlled is managed, while a risk you've merely noted and ignored is just waiting to cause harm. Now we turn to the lifeblood of AI, data, starting with how it's collected and sourced. Remember, AI learns from data, so where that data comes from shapes everything. Here's the principle. Data collection and sourcing standards are the rules an organization sets for how it obtains the data used to build AI, ensuring it's gathered lawfully, ethically, and appropriately. It's about being deliberate, not careless, about your data's origins. Why does the source matter so much? Let me remind you of a theme we keep returning to: garbage in, garbage out. But it's more than quality, it's also legitimacy. Where data comes from raises legal and ethical questions, not just technical ones. Let me give you an example. Imagine a company training an AI on data scraped from the internet without permission. Even if the data is useful, they may be violating copyright, privacy, or terms of use, exposing themselves to serious legal trouble. Now imagine a company that carefully sources data, ensuring it has the right to use it and that it was collected fairly. Which one is on solid ground? Clearly the second. So good sourcing standards ask key questions. Do we have the legal right to use this data? Was it collected with appropriate consent or basis? Is the source trustworthy and representative? These questions, asked before training, prevent enormous problems later. Here's the governance takeaway. Data sourcing is a foundational governance concern because problems baked in at the data stage are nearly impossible to fix afterward. As a professional, always probe the origins of the data. Ask, where did this come from? Do we have the right to use it? And was it obtained responsibly? Because responsible AI starts with responsibly sourced data. Get the foundation wrong, and everything built on top of it inherits the flaw. Let's dig deeper into data with two closely linked ideas: data quality and fitness for purpose. These determine whether your data can actually support a trustworthy AI system. Let's start with data quality. This is about whether the data is accurate, complete, consistent, and up to date. Poor quality data, full of errors, gaps, or outdated information, leads to poor AI no matter how clever the model. But here's the part people often miss: fitness for purpose. Data can be high quality in general, yet completely wrong for your specific use. Fitness for purpose asks, is this data actually suitable for what we're trying to do? Let me make that distinction vivid. Imagine you have a beautifully accurate, complete dataset of weather in one city. High quality? No doubt. But if you're building an AI to predict weather in a completely different climate, that data is unfit for your purpose, no matter how pristine it is. See how quality and fitness are different things? Here's a real example. Suppose a hospital trains a diagnostic AI on data from young, healthy adults, then deploys it on elderly patients. The data might be high quality, but it's not fit for that population. The system will likely fail the very people it's used on. Here's the governance insight. You have to ask both questions. Is this data good, and is it right for this specific job? Excellent data used for the wrong purpose is still a recipe for failure. As a professional, always probe fitness, not just quality. Ask, does this data truly represent the situation and people the AI will actually face? Because an AI is only as appropriate as the match between its data and its real-world use. Getting that match right is one of the most important and most overlooked governance checks. Let's explore two concepts that bring order and accountability to how data is managed: data governance and data lineage. These keep your data trustworthy throughout its life. Let's start with data governance. This is the overall framework of policies, roles, and processes for managing data properly. Who's responsible for it, how it's handled, who can access it, and how its quality is maintained. Think of it as the rulebook and management system for your data. Then there's data lineage, which is a more specific and fascinating idea. Lineage is the ability to trace data's journey, where it came from, how it's been transformed, and where it's been used. Think of it like a chain of custody for data, knowing its full history. Let me explain why lineage matters with an example. Imagine an AI system produces a questionable result, and you need to investigate. With good data lineage, you can trace exactly which data fed the system, where it originated, and how it was processed. Without lineage, you're lost, unable to figure out what went wrong or whether the data was even appropriate. Have you ever tried to debug a problem with no record of how you got there? Painful. Lineage prevents that. Here's a practical scenario. Suppose a regulator asks a company to prove that personal data in its AI was used lawfully. With strong data governance and lineage, the company can show the data's origin, consent, and handling. Without it, they're exposed. Here's the governance lesson. Data governance ensures data is managed responsibly, and lineage ensures you can always trace and account for it. Together, they provide control and transparency. As a professional, always ask, do we know where our data came from and how it's been handled? Because data you can't trace is data you can't truly govern. And in a world of growing scrutiny, that traceability is becoming essential. Let's close this chapter with two requirements that protect both people and systems: privacy and security in the context of AI data. These are non-negotiable foundations. Let's start with privacy. We've touched on this before, but here we focus on the data itself. Privacy requirements ensure that personal data used in AI is handled in line with people's rights and the law, collected appropriately, used only as permitted, and respecting individuals' control over their information. Remember, AI's hunger for data makes privacy especially challenging. Then there's security, which protects that data from unauthorized access, theft, or tampering. AI systems often hold large amounts of sensitive data, making them attractive targets. Security requirements ensure that data is properly safeguarded throughout its life. Let me show how these work together with an example. Imagine an AI system trained on customers' financial information. Privacy requirements ensure the company only uses that data appropriately and respects customers' rights. Security requirements ensure that data is encrypted, access is controlled, and it can't be stolen or leaked. Both must hold. A privacy respectful system that gets hacked still harms people, and a secure system that misuses data still violates rights. Here's an AI specific wrinkle worth remembering. Sometimes AI can inadvertently expose sensitive data. For instance, a model unintentionally revealing information from its training data. So, privacy and security in AI go beyond the database, they extend into the model itself. Here's the closing governance lesson. Privacy and security requirements protect the people behind the data and the integrity of the system. They're foundational, not optional. As a professional, always ask, are we protecting this data both from misuse and from attack? Because handling data responsibly means honoring people's privacy and guarding against threats at the same time. And with that, we've built the full set of front end guardrails, from evaluating the use case all the way to protecting the data. These early checks are where responsible AI truly takes root.